In a snow-covered village lost to time, where the crackle of firewood was a luxury and the silence of the forest wrapped every home like a second roof, lived a little girl named Alenka. She was 9 years old, with eyes that held a quiet trust in the world, the kind of trust only children are allowed to keep. She was the granddaughter of the village healer, a stern yet kind woman with hands that smelled of pine resin and thyme. Their cottage sat on the edge of the village, closest to the forest line, where the trees stood tall and thick, as if guarding ancient secrets. Alenka had a friend, loyal, silent, brave in ways that few could ever understand. Her name was Grunya, a black mare with a thick forelock and eyes that looked like they knew more than words could tell. She had belonged to Alenka's grandfather, lost long ago to the war. Since then, the mare had become a part of their household, not just for labor, but for something else, something deeper. Grunya was wild with most people. She shied away from adults, refused to let them near. But with Alenka, it was different from the first moment. The horse would lower her head gently when the girl approached, nostrils flaring not in fear, but in recognition. Every morning before sunrise, Alenka would sneak out with a piece of black bread or a single dried apple in hand. And every morning, Grunya would be waiting. They stood together like two souls bound by something older than words. Sometimes they didn't even touch. They just watched each other in stillness. It was as if the mare understood the child's heart better than any person ever could. That winter was harsher than any the village had known in years. The river froze solid before the solstice. Firewood was running low. And from the distant hills, the wolves had begun to descend. "Wolves, Alenka," her grandmother said one evening, her voice low and steady. "They're hungry and brave." Alenka nodded but didn't quite believe it. Not fully. Not in the way a child understands danger. She had Grunya, after all. And to her, that meant safety. But even the strongest belief must eventually meet reality. And sometimes yellow eyes in the woods. That morning, snow fell like flowers shaken from the sky. Thick, heavy flakes. The world was quiet, wrapped in white. Alenka woke early, long before her grandmother. She slipped into her coat, tied her scarf twice around her neck, and stepped outside. She wanted to collect a bundle of sticks for the morning fire. Just a few. The path curved near the edge of the trees. It was still within view of the village fence, just barely. She walked quickly, breath forming small clouds in front of her. But as she turned the bend, her boots crunching softly, she saw them. Tracks. Large ones. Not hers. Not her grandmother's. Not human. Wolf tracks. Alenka froze. Her heart thudded once, loud, like it might echo. She stepped back. Once. Twice. Then she heard it. A low growl. From the wall of snow-dusted brush, a gray snout emerged. Then two yellow eyes. Unblinking. Focused. A second wolf stepped out beside the first, shoulders low, for spiked by the cold and hunger. They weren't attacking. Not yet. They were waiting. Watching. Alenka didn't scream. She couldn't. Her breath had left her. And then, like thunder shaking the sky, came the sound of hooves. Heavy. Sure. Rushing fast through snow and fear. Grunya. She tore through the clearing like a storm, her black coat a streak of motion, her breath steaming in the cold. She didn't hesitate. She ran straight between the wolves and the girl, rearing high with a force that broke the stillness like glass. The wolf shrank back. One yelped and turned. The other held its ground for a moment, then thought better of it. Grunya struck the frozen ground with her front hoof, once, with a thunderous crack. Snow scattered around her like smoke. She stood over Alenka, shielding her with her body. Alenka stood still, eyes wide, heart caught in her throat. For the first time in her life, she cried not out of pain, not from fear, but from something much deeper. The overwhelming feeling of being loved, protected by a creature who had no words, but spoke volumes with her courage. They stood together, the girl and the horse, in the white silence of the forest, two against the wild, and that was enough. The snow had started to slow. Thin rays of winter's sun broke through the pale sky, casting faint gold onto the white landscape. Alenka stood in the shadow of Grunya, her small mittened hand resting on the mare's leg. Her breath came in shaky bursts. She could still see the wolves at the edge of the trees, but they had stopped moving forward. They were calculating, uncertain now. Grunya didn't take her eyes off them. She stepped once, just slightly forward. Her powerful chest heaved as she exhaled in long streams of steam. The wolves held their ground for a moment more, and then they vanished back into the forest that had raised them, swallowed by the trees that knew them best. There were no howls, no cries, just silence. A quiet, deeper than fear, settled around them. Alenka slowly looked up at her protector. Grunya was calm now, still alert, but not tense. She turned her head slightly, enough for her dark eyes to meet the child's. And in that gaze was something that Alenka never forgot for the rest of her life, a promise. Grunya lowered her head and nudged the girl's shoulder gently, as if to say, "You're safe now. Let's go home." The walk back to the cottage was slow. Grunya didn't let Alenka out of her side. Each step was careful, deliberate. Snow creaked under their feet, and somewhere far above, a raven croaked once before gliding silently over the trees. When they reached the clearing, the old wooden fence of the homestead came into view. Smoke was now rising from the chimney. Her grandmother had woken. She was standing outside when she saw them. Her face paled, and the old woman dropped the bucket she'd been holding. Water splashed into the snow, freezing instantly on the surface. Alenka ran the last few steps and buried herself into the warmth of her grandmother's coat. No words, just tight arms wrapping around a trembling child. Grunya stood a few paces back, calm again, as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just stood between a child and death itself. Later, as the sun reached its cold noon peak and the stove hummed gently, Alenka lay wrapped in wool blankets, her cheeks flushed, but her eyes calm. Her grandmother sat nearby, stirring a pot of something fragrant. Every now and then, she glanced toward the window. "You always said she was special," the old woman whispered, mostly to herself. "I just never knew how much." Outside, Grunya stood near the edge of the barn, her head lowered peacefully, her breath misting in the cold air. The other horses kept their distance. She had always been different. Now they all knew. By evening, the story had already begun to spread. Children whispered about it with wide eyes. Adults shook their heads and crossed themselves, not because they didn't believe, but because they did. In the village, where every winter took something away, and every fire was lit with caution and prayer, stories like this didn't just survive, they mattered. They reminded people that there was still wonder in the world, that love, in its most silent and loyal form, could come galloping through snow when all hope was nearly lost. Grunya never left the girl's side after that. Wherever Alenka went, she followed. Not like a horse, like a guardian. And though Alenka would grow, and seasons would change, and eventually, even the old cottage would fall silent, the tale of that day remained, passed from voice to voice, by the fire and through the frost. They called it the day the black horse turned the wolves away. They called it bravery. But for Alenka, it was simply love. Winter gave way slowly that year, like an old guest reluctant to leave. Snow lingered well into March, hardening into crusted ice along the edges of paths and roofs. But something had changed in the village, not the weather, not the land, but the way people looked at things. Especially at Grunya. She was no longer just that black mare from the edge of the village. She became a presence, respected, almost revered. Children peered through fences to catch a glimpse of her, and even the elders, those who'd seen too many winters to be impressed by tales, began to nod slowly when her name came up in hushed conversations. But Grunya didn't seem to notice. Or if she did, she paid it no mind. Her world still turned around one center, Alenka. The girl had changed too, not in ways you'd spot at first glance. She still tied her scarf crooked, still dropped half of her bread on the way to the barn. But there was something steadier in her now, like she had seen behind a curtain most children didn't even know existed. She wasn't afraid of the woods anymore. She respected them. But fear? No. Grunya had taught her something different. One morning, after a long night of wind and cracking branches, Alenka was helping her grandmother mend a torn blanket when a knock came at the door. That alone was strange. In their part of the village, people didn't knock. They called out, or they simply came in. Standing outside was Ivan, a tall man with wide shoulders and a beard that always smelled faintly of tobacco and hay. He was the stable keeper at the church grounds, and though he rarely spoke much, people said he knew horses better than priests knew prayers. "Forgive the bother," he said, looking from the grandmother to Alenka. "But it's about your mare." Grunya. Alenka's stomach tightened, but not from fear. She slipped on her boots and followed him, her grandmother right behind. The walk to the church grounds was quiet. The snow crunched differently here, mixed with gravel and old straw. As they approached, Alenka saw a group gathered near the stable wall. Men mostly, a few women, and one boy no older than herself, clutching something tight to his chest. It was a puppy. Thin, shaking. Its leg was bent unnaturally, as if broken. The boy looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "She wouldn't let anyone near it," he whispered. "Not even Papa." That's when Alenka saw her. Grunya stood over the small animal like a sentinel, her legs planted firmly, her breath slow. The puppy lay curled between her hooves, trembling but untouched. Ivan stepped forward quietly. He must have been attacked by strays. Crawled in under the fence. The mare found him this morning. We tried to get close. She wouldn't move. One of the older men muttered, "Strange beast. Like she knows." Alenka didn't wait. She ducked under the fence, boots slipping slightly on the packed snow. As she approached, Grunya turned her head, ears flicking. But there was no resistance, no warning, just trust. Alenka knelt slowly beside the puppy. Its eyes blinked weakly. She reached out and gently touched its side. Grunya shifted slightly, making room, lowering her head until her muzzle nearly brushed the child's shoulder. "She's protecting him," Alenka whispered, "like she did me." The moment held, soft and quiet, like the world was holding its breath. From that day on, the villagers stopped calling her simply brave. They started calling her wise. The puppy recovered. Slowly. The boy named him Topa, short for top oak, little poplar, because he survived the cold, like the trees do. He and Alenka became friends, bonded by the animal who had once turned wolves away and now guarded the weakest among them like a sacred duty. As for Grunya, she never once tried to leave the village, though the fences were often open. She always returned. Her place was not just in a barn, but in the hearts of those who remembered. And long after, when Alenka was grown and had children of her own, people still told the stories. Of a winter with too many wolves, of a girl no taller than a fence post, and of the black mare who stepped out of legend, not with a sword, but with silence and strength. Years passed as gently as the breeze that rustled the birch leaves in spring. The winter still came, harsh, biting, but the story of that one, the winter of the wolves, never faded. Children born long after it had passed would still whisper of Grunya, as if she were a guardian spirit who might still appear if someone was in true need. Alenka grew. Not quickly, but with the calm certainty of someone who knew their place in the world. She no longer brought crusts of bread to the barn in her coat pocket. Now, she carried pails of oats and tended to the hooves herself. Her hair had grown long and thick, the color of chestnuts, and her hands bore the strength of someone who'd worked through more than one storm. Grunya grew older too. Her coat, once a deep, glossy black, had begun to fade at the muzzle and around the eyes. Her steps were slower now, more deliberate. But her spirit? Unchanged. She still stood tall near the fence at dawn, still watched the forest line when no one else noticed the movement in the trees. And her bond with Alenka had only deepened. They no longer needed words, or even gestures. Where one stood, the other turned. Where one moved, the other followed. By the time Alenka turned 17, she was known not just as the healer's granddaughter, but as something else, the horse's girl. Not with mockery, with reverence. One autumn evening, a boy came running up the path from the river, out of breath and soaked to the knees. His name was Petia, the blacksmith's son. He clutched a torn jacket and shouted before he even reached the gate. The bridge. It collapsed. There's a cart in the river. Alenka didn't wait. She didn't ask who it was. She just ran. The river wasn't far, maybe a 10-minute ride. But the path was winding, the woods thick. She burst into the barn, grabbed the bridle, and for a moment, just a moment, she hesitated. Grunya was in the back stall, resting on her side. She hadn't been ridden in almost a year. Alenka stepped forward. No commands. No tugging. She knelt beside the mare and whispered, "It's someone's child." Grunya rose. Not slowly. Not with the stiff ache of an old body. She stood like a shadow stretching toward the sun, tall, proud, ready. Moments later, the villagers looked up from the field and saw what they thought they'd never see again. Alenka, astride the black mare, thundering down the slope like the turning of a season. The bridge had indeed collapsed. A narrow wooden span over a fast-running part of the river, just before the bend. A farmer's cart had gone down with it. 2 oxen were already gone, dragged away by the current. But trapped in the rear bed of the cart, wedged between broken beams, was a child, barely conscious, water rising. Grunya didn't hesitate. She charged into the shallows, hooves slipping on the rocks. The river sprayed around her like smoke. Alenka clung low to her back, teeth gritted against the cold. The water reached the mare's chest, then her neck. Still she pressed forward. The child, a girl, maybe 6, looked up just once, her eyes wide, then closed again. Alenka leapt from Grunya's back into the wreckage, pulling at the wood with numb fingers, calling over the rush of the current. Behind her, Grunya stood braced against the pull of the water, holding steady, like an anchor, like a promise. They freed the child. Somehow, Alenka lifted her onto Grunya's back, climbed up behind her, and with one final push, the mare turned and carried them all back to shore. By the time they reached land, the villagers were waiting. Blankets, hands, voices, all reaching for them. The girl was taken quickly, rushed toward the warmth of fire and cloth. Alenka slid down, her knees buckling. Grunya stood still. She didn't move. Not at first. And then she slowly sank to her knees. The hush that followed was unlike anything the village had known. Not a silence of fear, but a farewell. Alenka knelt beside her, pressed her forehead to the mare's own, and whispered something no one else could hear. Grunya's breath came soft, slower, then still. The first snow of the season began to fall. She was buried next day on the high hill just beyond the pasture, the one where she used to stand and watch the tree line, even after her legs could no longer run. The villagers came with candles and quiet voices. The blacksmith carved a simple marker. Grunya, the horse who protected more than lives. For years after, no one dared pasture animals on that hill. They said it wasn't right. that it belonged to something greater now. And when fog rolled in thick and early, some swore they still saw her silhouette, tall, dark, watching the woods. Alenka lived a full life. She became the healer, as her grandmother had once been. But every time someone knocked on her door late at night, needing help, or every time a child asked if the stories were real, she would look out toward the hill and smile. The years rolled forward like pages in a well-loved book, worn at the corners but treasured all the same. The village changed, roofs replaced, paths straightened, even a few power lines appeared. But some things remained untouched. The hill, Grunya's hill. By the time Alenka was an old woman, her hair silver, her back gently bowed, the tale of the black mare had become legend. Not folklore, not fantasy. Legend. Parents still whispered it to their children when the wind howled too loud at night. Teachers let the oldest students read The Brave Horse of the North on the first snow each winter. And every year, on the day the first frost appeared, a single candle was left at the base of the hill. No one ever said who left it, but it was always there. Alenka lived in a small house near the school now. The old cottage had long since faded into memory, and her grandmother's herbs had given way to new medicine and strange names. Still, children would come to her porch, especially in winter, for stories. One girl came more than most. Her name was Vera, 7 years old, fierce as fire, with a head full of tangled hair and 1,000 questions behind her eyes. She never sat still, except when Alenka spoke of Grunya. One afternoon, as snow drifted down in soft flakes and a pot of jam bubbled slowly on the stove, Vera sat cross-legged on the rug, chin in her hands. "Did Grunya know she was going to die?" she asked. Alenka paused, not out of sadness, but from the weight of the question. "She knew her time had come," she said gently, but she didn't fear it. She gave everything she had, even at the end. Vera frowned. But how did she know how to do all those things? Horses aren't people. Alenka smiled. "No, they aren't. But sometimes," she said, reaching for the window latch to let in a bit of cold, "the soul knows more than the body does." And hers was an old soul, maybe even older than mine. The girl looked thoughtful. Then, almost shyly, "Can I go see her?" Alenka looked up sharply. Vera clarified. "The place. The hill." It was late. Snow was falling heavier now, and the sun was dipping low. But something in the girl's voice made Alenka nod. Wrapped in scarves and coats, they walked the path in silence. Alenka held a small lantern. Vera carried a small satchel. The wind had picked up, and the snow whispered secrets through the trees. When they reached the hilltop, Vera stepped forward first. There was no grand statue, no plaque, just a simple wooden marker, carefully maintained, with the same carving it had always had. Grunya, the horse who protected more than lives. Vera knelt. From her satchel, she pulled out a tiny carved horse, no taller than a matchbox, painted black with white eyes. She placed it gently at the base of the marker. "I made it in class," she said quietly. "For her." Alenka didn't speak. She let the moment settle. Then Vera stood, looked toward the distant tree line, and whispered, "Do you think she still watches the woods?" Alenka placed a hand on her shoulder. "No," she said softly. "Now, I think she watches us." And for a moment, just a breath, the wind shifted. It carried no snow, no chill, only the soft scent of horsehair and pine. Alenka turned back toward the path. Vera followed, glancing over her shoulder one last time. And there, where the snow lay untouched, some said they saw hoof prints. Not fresh, not old, just there, waiting, watching. Still, the wind howled more fiercely that winter than Alenka had ever remembered. Even the trees seemed to bend in submission, their branches curling and snapping as if they, too, were giving up against the onslaught of the cold. There was no mistaking it. This winter was different. It carried with it a heaviness, an unknown weight that pressed against the village, settling in the bones of the earth itself. But for Alenka, it was a season of promise. She had seen how the villagers had changed over the years, how Grunya's sacrifice had not just turned her into a legend, but a beacon. The bond between the village and the creatures of the forest had deepened. Animals were no longer seen as mere tools or commodities, but as equals, as protectors in their own right. The forests had learned to trust the people, and the people, in turn, had learned to protect the forests. Still, there was something beneath it all, something unsettled. One morning, after a particularly fierce snowstorm, a loud knock sounded at Alenka's door. It was Ivan, the stable keeper from the church grounds, breath ragged, eyes wide with fear. "There's something in the woods," he said, gripping the doorframe. We don't know what it is, but it's not like anything we've ever seen. It's too big, too fast, and it's hunting our livestock." Alenka's heart skipped a beat. "Wolves?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "No," Ivan said, shaking his head. "Not wolves. They hunt in packs. This thing is alone, and it doesn't make sense. It's not a bear. It's too fast, too silent." Grunya shifted behind Alenka, a low sound vibrating in her chest. Her ears pricked up, and her body stiffened, as though she could feel the same unease that Alenka did. "There's only one way to know," Alenka said, her voice firm. She wrapped herself in furs and stood tall. "Prepare the horses. We'll go to the forest." The wind howled more fiercely that winter than Alenka had ever remembered. Even the trees seemed to bend in submission, their branches curling and snapping as if they, too, were giving up against the onslaught of the cold. There was no mistaking it. This winter was different. It carried with it a heaviness, an unknown weight that pressed against the village, settling in the bones of the earth itself. But for Alenka, it was a season of promise. She had seen how the villagers had changed over the years, how Grunya's sacrifice had not just turned her into a legend, but a beacon. The bond between the village and the creatures of the forest had deepened. Animals were no longer seen as mere tools or commodities, but as equals, as protectors in their own right. The forests had learned to trust the people, and the people, in turn, had learned to protect the forests. Still, there was something beneath it all, something unsettled. One morning, after a particularly fierce snowstorm, a loud knock sounded at Alenka's door. It was Ivan, the stable keeper from the church grounds, breath ragged, eyes wide with fear. "There's something in the woods," he said, gripping the doorframe. We don't know what it is, but it's not like anything we've ever seen. It's too big, too fast, and it's hunting our livestock." Alenka's heart skipped a beat. "Wolves?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "No," Ivan said, shaking his head. "Not wolves. They hunt in packs. This thing is alone, and it doesn't make sense. It's not a bear. It's too fast, too silent." Grunya shifted behind Alenka, a low sound vibrating in her chest. Her ears pricked up, and her body stiffened, as though she could feel the same unease that Alenka did. "There's only one way to know," Alenka said, her voice firm. She wrapped herself in furs and stood tall. "Prepare the horses. We'll go to the forest." The forest held its breath. The air between Alenka and the figure seemed to thicken, and even Grunya, usually so steadfast and strong, stood frozen. The wind died down, the snowflakes halted midair, and everything in the clearing grew still, as if time itself had come to a halt. The figure stretched its hand toward Alenka, and she could feel a chill that was not of the winter air, but something older, something colder. "Do you truly understand what you are facing, child?" the voice whispered, though the figure's mouth never moved. "The balance of this forest is fragile. I have guarded it for centuries, and I have allowed the humans to live in peace. But now you break that balance. You carry with you a legacy that was never meant for you." Alenka's heart pounded in her chest, but her resolve only hardened. She could feel the presence of Grunya beside her, the bond between them stronger than ever. This was not the time for fear. "I don't know who you are," Alenka said, her voice steady despite the cold that gnawed at her bones. "But I know this land. I know these woods. And I know that we will not allow you to harm our village, our animals, or our home." The figure's hollow eyes gleamed for a moment, as if considering her words. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it raised its hand and pointed toward the distant trees. "There are things in this forest, young one, that you do not understand," the figure said. "But you will. If you wish to prove your worth, you must journey deeper into these woods. You must face what lurks there, what has been disturbed by the imbalance you and your kind have caused. Only then will I know if you are truly worthy." A heavy silence followed, broken only by the distant howl of wind through the trees. "You want me to go deeper?" Alenka asked, her voice laced with both determination and caution. "What's waiting for me out there?" The figure did not answer directly. Instead, it gestured toward the dark expanse of the forest beyond the clearing. "There's a place, deep in the heart of these woods," it said. "A place where the first guardians of the forest fell, where the old ones left their mark. You must go there and retrieve what was lost. Only then will you prove that you understand the power you now wield." Alenka glanced at Grunya, who snorted softly, stamping her hooves in the snow. It was clear that Grunya, too, felt the weight of this task. The mare was no stranger to the wilds of the forest. Together, they had weathered storms, faced dangers, and shared countless adventures. But this was something different. This was not just about the land or the village. This was about the very balance of nature. Alenka turned back to the figure, her eyes locked with its hollow gaze. "I will go. I will face whatever you've set before me." The figure's face, if it could be called a face, twisted into something resembling a smile. It was not a smile of warmth or joy, but one of dark satisfaction, as though it had long awaited this moment. "Very well, child. But be warned," the voice echoed, filling the space around them. "There are forces in this forest that will test you, that will challenge every step you take. Some things you may not return from. Remember, the balance is fragile, and you must face what was lost." The figure slowly began to fade, its form dissolving into the wind like smoke. Alenka stood still for a moment, her breath rising in clouds of white. Grunya let out a soft whinny, nudging Alenka's shoulder as if to reassure her. The mare, though silent, was ever present. They were a team. They had always been. Turning toward the darkened woods, Alenka clenched the reins and set her eyes forward. "We'll find this place," she whispered, "and we'll restore the balance." With that, she urged Grunya forward, stepping into the shadows of the trees, the unknown awaiting them in the depths of the forest. The forest grew darker as Alenka and Grunya moved deeper into its heart. The trees, towering and ancient, seemed to close in on them, their branches like twisted fingers reaching for the sky. The air thickened, colder than before, and every step felt heavier, as if the very earth was trying to hold them back. Grunya's hooves sank into the snow, her powerful legs moving steadily, though even she seemed uneasy in this place. Alenka kept her eyes fixed on the path ahead, but her senses were on high alert. The further they went, the more the forest felt alive, and not in the way she had known it before. It wasn't the vibrant hum of nature that made the woods so rich, but an unsettling silence. The birds were gone. No rustling of small animals. Even the wind had stopped whispering its secrets. "There's something wrong here," Alenka murmured under her breath. Grunya's ears flicked back, but she did not stop. The mare's instincts were as sharp as ever, and she knew better than to show fear. They were in this together, and they would face whatever came. As they pressed on, the trees began to thin out, revealing a small, hidden glade bathed in an eerie, unnatural light. The snow here was undisturbed, and the air was thick with a strange, heavy fog. In the center of the glade stood a large stone, its surface covered in ancient markings that Alenka could barely make out in the dim light. They appeared to be symbols, not of the forest, not of the animals, but something older, something forgotten. Alenka felt a tug in her chest. This was the place. She could feel it deep within her bones. This was where the guardians had fallen. This was where the balance had been broken. Grunya halted at the edge of the glade, her body tense, her eyes scanning the area. Alenka slid off the mare's back, her boots crunching in the snow as she approached the stone. The markings on the stone pulsed with a strange energy, glowing faintly in the dim light. As Alenka touched the surface, the symbols seemed to shift beneath her fingers, rearranging themselves into a pattern she recognized. The ancient runes of protection, of guardianship, of the bond between the land and those who lived upon it. Her fingers tingled with the power that hummed through the stone. This was it, the heart of the forest's power, the source of the balance that had been disrupted. She had to restore it, but how? Grunya, Alenka whispered, glancing back at the mare, who had stepped forward, sensing her unease. The air around them grew colder still. Alenka's breath turned to mist, and a dark shadow moved across the glade, like a ripple in the very air itself. Then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. It was tall, towering even above Grunya, its form cloaked in shadow. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and its voice was like the cracking of ice. "You have come," it said, its voice echoing through the glade. "But you are not ready." Alenka stood her ground, though her heart raced in her chest. The figure's presence was suffocating, but she couldn't back down now. Not after everything she had fought for, not after the sacrifices that had been made. "I've come to restore the balance," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the stillness. "To return what was lost." The figure's eyes narrowed. "You seek to undo what has been done, but the forest does not simply give back what it has taken. There are consequences. There are prices that must be paid." Alenka swallowed hard, but she did not falter. "I will pay whatever price is necessary. I will protect this land." The figure's shadowed form seemed to grow even larger, its voice deeper. "Then you must face the trials of the guardians. You must prove that you are worthy of the power you seek." With a wave of its hand, the ground beneath Alenka's feet began to tremble. The stone pulsed with an intense light, and the air thickened with energy, as if the very forest was coming alive to watch. Grunya stepped forward, her hooves sinking into the snow, a soft but resolute whinny escaping her lips. Alenka reached out to her, feeling the mare's strength surge through her. "I'm ready," Alenka said, though she wasn't sure if it was true. She had never faced a trial like this before, but there was no turning back. The figure raised its hand once more, and the ground shifted beneath them, opening up a deep chasm in the earth. The fog swirled around them, and a chill filled the air, like death itself had crept into the forest. "You will enter the trial," the figure intoned, "and only if you survive, only if you prove your worth, will you restore the balance. Fail, and the forest will reclaim what it has lost." With that, the figure vanished into the mist, leaving Alenka and Grunya alone at the edge of the chasm. The winds howled, the trees groaned as if in warning, and the earth trembled beneath their feet. Alenka knew that she was standing at the precipice of something far greater than herself. She had come here to restore the balance, but the cost of doing so was unclear. All she could do now was trust in herself, trust in Grunya, and face whatever lay ahead. The trial was about to begin. The air was thick with tension. The chasm before them yawned like the mouth of the earth, dark and endless. Alenka could feel the ground trembling beneath her boots, and the winds howled with a ferocity that made her skin crawl. It was as if the forest itself were alive, watching, waiting for her to make the next move. Grunya, ever steady and true, stood beside her, her dark eyes locked on the abyss. The bond between them had only grown stronger in these trying moments, and Alenka felt the mare's quiet strength seep into her own soul. Together, they had faced dangers, weathered storms, and withstood trials that would have broken many. But this was different. This was the heart of the forest, the source of all its power, and Alenka was about to face something far beyond the physical. With a deep breath, Alenka took a step forward. Her footfall echoed through the air as she moved toward the chasm, and for a moment, she felt herself hesitate. The darkness seemed to reach out to her, cold tendrils brushing against her mind, whispering doubts. What if you fail? What if the forest doesn't forgive you? But Grunya stepped forward, nudging her gently with her nose, as if to say, "We are not alone." Alenka looked at the mare, feeling the deep trust between them. She nodded, tightening her grip on the reins, and took another step. The earth groaned beneath her, and suddenly, the ground shifted, opening wide before her like a yawning mouth. A low, booming voice echoed from the chasm, reverberating through the air. It was the voice of the figure, now deep and foreboding, like thunder in the distance. "You seek to restore what has been broken," the voice rumbled. "But the forest is not so easily mended. It will not return to what it once was without a sacrifice." Alenka stopped, the words sinking into her heart. A sacrifice. She had known, deep down, that this moment would come, that to restore the balance, she would have to give up something dear. But she had no idea what that sacrifice would be. The thought terrified her, and yet, she couldn't turn back. "Tell me what you ask of me," she said, her voice unwavering despite the fear that gripped her chest. From the depths of the chasm, a figure began to rise. Not the shadowy being she had encountered earlier, but something even more ancient. A spirit of the forest, tall and wise, with eyes like glowing embers, and a presence that radiated both power and sorrow. Its voice was like the wind through the trees, ancient and timeless. "You must prove that you understand the true nature of the balance," it said, its form shifting as it spoke. "The forest, the animals, the land, they all live in harmony, but harmony is fragile. It requires both light and shadow, life and death. You, child, must face the greatest of these trials." Alenka's heart raced. What is the trial? The spirit's eyes glowed brighter, casting a warm, flickering light on the darkened ground. "To restore the balance, you must offer what you hold most dear," the spirit intoned. "For the land to heal, you must give something of equal value in return." Alenka's breath caught. What was dearer to her than her village, her people, her land? What could she possibly sacrifice? She turned to Grunya, her heart aching. The mare had been her constant companion, her protector, her friend. Could she truly sacrifice the one who had stood by her side through every storm, every trial? As if reading her thoughts, Grunya nuzzled her gently, her dark eyes filled with understanding. Alenka could feel the mare's quiet reassurance, the bond between them unspoken but clear. Alenka turned back to the spirit, her voice steady though her heart was torn. "I understand. I am willing to sacrifice what is needed, but I will not give up my bond with Grunya. We are one." The spirit regarded her with a long, heavy silence, as though considering her words. Then it nodded slowly. "Very well, child," it said. "You will face the greatest trial, not of the body, but of the heart. Only by understanding true sacrifice can you restore the balance. The choice will be yours." The ground beneath her feet trembled, and suddenly, The chasm before her began to shift. A great light filled the space, blinding in its intensity. For a moment, Alenka shielded her eyes, but the light faded quickly, leaving behind a serene stillness. When she opened her eyes again, she saw something that made her heart stop. A path had appeared, a narrow bridge of stone, leading deep into the heart of the forest. But at the far end, beyond the bridge, stood something she could not bear to look at. It was Grunya. The mare stood alone at the far end of the bridge, her body twisted and changed. She was still Grunya, but her eyes were empty, devoid of life. A hollow shell of the mare that Alenka knew and loved. "No," Alenka whispered, stepping forward instinctively, but the path was blocked. The voice of the spirit echoed again, calm and clear. "You must choose, child. To restore the balance, you must part with what you love. To heal the land, the bond you share must be broken." Tears welled in Alenka's eyes. She could feel her heart breaking. The mare that had been her strength, her protector, her family, the very spirit of the forest embodied in Grunya, would be lost forever if she chose to save the land. But she couldn't do it. She couldn't bear to part with Grunya, the one who had stood by her through every hardship, the one who had saved her time and time again. "I won't do it," Alenka said, her voice breaking. "I can't lose her." The spirit's form shimmered with ancient sorrow. "Then you choose the forest, or you choose the one who has walked with you. The balance will be restored, but only if you sacrifice what you hold dear." Alenka stood on the edge of the chasm, her heart torn in two, her eyes locked on Grunya. She could feel the earth trembling beneath her feet, could feel the weight of the choice pressing down on her. The decision was hers alone. But as she stood there, torn between the two, Grunya's form began to glow, brighter and brighter, until it was as if the entire forest was alive with light. The mare's eyes, once empty, filled with warmth, and Alenka felt the bond between them pulse with strength. Grunya's whinny echoed through the glade, and Alenka understood. The spirit's trial was not one of separation. It was a trial of unity. The bond they shared could not be broken. Together, they would heal the land. Together they would restore the balance. "I choose both," Alenka said, her voice strong now, her heart resolute. "I choose the forest, and I choose Grunya. The balance will be restored through us, together." With those words, the ground beneath them shuddered, and the light flared once more, blinding in its brilliance. When it faded, Alenka found herself back at the edge of the glade, Grunya beside her, the forest humming with life once more. The balance had been restored, and she had passed the final trial. The spirit appeared one last time, its form glowing with approval. "You have chosen wisely, child," it said, its voice now gentle and warm. "The bond between you and the land is stronger than any sacrifice. The balance has been restored, and you have proven yourself worthy." Alenka smiled, her heart full of gratitude and love for the mare at her side. They had done it. Together. The forest, once dark and troubled, now felt alive with hope. The trials were over, and peace had been restored. And with that, Alenka and Grunya turned to leave, knowing that the journey had just begun.